Hi, I'm Dr. Carolyn Davidson of Elliot Cardiovascular Consultants in Manchester, New Hampshire. We've been talking about the Mediterranean diet, and one of my favorite parts about the Mediterranean diet is incorporating lentils into what I'm eating. So the Mediterranean diet is very heavy in fruits, vegetables, legumes, things like beans and lentils. So you can use lentils or other legumes like beans in place of meat. I like to put it in sauces or soups, things like tomato sauce instead of ground beef. But my favorite way of incorporating lentils into my regular diet is I use it in the place of meat for stroganoff. So I'm going to show you this recipe that has been sort of adjusted from my dad's stroganoff recipe that was initially meant for filet mignon, which I always thought was very expensive. So I usually used ground beef and have since adopted this recipe to have lentils instead of meat. Now, lentils are amazing. They come in little packets like this. They're inexpensive. It's like $2 for this entire bag, and they're a nutritional powerhouse. So in a quarter cup of dried lentils, it's only about 100 calories, but you get about 8 grams of fiber, 8 grams of protein. So it's just a lot of nutrition in this. And not a lot of other fats or calories or sodium. So anytime that you're cooking with lentils, you usually preheat them unless you're going to make them into a stew or a soup. So I have about a cup of dried lentils that I put in a cup of water, or 3 cups of water with some pepper. You can put some salt in it. You can put a clove of garlic or any other herbs that you like. And just cook it for 15 to 20 minutes, depending on how soft you like it. If you like it very soft, you can do even more than 20 minutes. If you like it a little crunchier, you can do it for about 15 minutes. I did mine for about 20 minutes, so they're thoroughly cooked. The next thing we're going to do is saute the mushroom. So I have a pound of cremini or baby bella mushrooms that are sliced very thinly. And then I'm just going to put them in a hot pan with just extra virgin olive oil and saute them until they're brown. So I have a pan heating over medium to high heat. I'm going to put a big heavy drip of extra virgin olive oil, which is probably about 1 to 2 tablespoons. I'm going to add my 1 pound of thinly sliced mushrooms. And I'm going to turn up the heat just a little bit. And I'm going to saute these. And once I get them in the pan, I sort of space them out. These mushrooms have been cleaned and sliced and dried. But I spread them out in the pan so they get cooked evenly. And I try not to touch them at least for a minute or 2 until I think the bottom is nice and brown. I will put some crushed pepper on it, and sometimes I'll put a little bit of salt, but you want to make sure that the mushrooms have already started to saute before you add any salt. Otherwise, it'll bring all the water out at once. Now, you'll notice that the mushrooms are pretty well spaced out in the pan. The better spaced out, the more spaced out they are, the better. It'll help them to saute and get brown without pulling all the moisture out, so they're not basically boiling in their own water. So you're going to keep doing this. You can, after you wait 2 or 3 minutes, you can toss them around, make sure that they all get even amount of heat. And you're going to keep doing this until they're pretty well browned, but a delicate brown. So I'll show you what that looks like after I cook these a little bit more. I'm just putting some fresh black pepper on them. And as they cook, they will slowly pull out some of the water. So the water is going to evaporate as it browns, which is just what you want. So this will continue to cook. After it's a little more brown, if you wanted to add a little bit of salt, if you don't have hypertension or heart failure, you can add a little bit of salt, but you don't need to. There's going to be tons of flavor in this dish. It does not need a lot of salt. As you can see, as you cook these down, they really lose a lot of volume because they have a lot of water in them. So now they're pretty well sauteed. They're all nice and brown. So whereas they were a full layer at the bottom of my pan. Now they're not even that. So before I take them out, I'm going to give them a big heavy splash of red wine, which will mostly cook down, but you'll end up with some great red wine flavor, which will incorporate nicely into the next step. So I just use a Cabernet Sauvignon. You can use whatever you want, whatever you've got around, and it doesn't need to be super high, fancy cooking wine. You can also use white wine if you have white wine around. But because it's going to have a tomato base, I use red wine. And I just cook this for another minute or so until the red wine has mostly evaporated, but you end up with some of the liquid, which will keep the mushrooms moist as you do the next part. So I'm just going to pour this all into a plate, put it back on the stove. I'm going to turn down the heat just a little bit and put another 2 tablespoons of olive oil into my pan. Then I have diced a medium to large size onion, which I'll put back into the pan, or into the pan for the first time, and let that saute. And you're going to let that onion brown probably for about 5 minutes. And you'll need to toss it around every minute or two until it all gets sort of evenly, nicely golden in color. And the onions will sort of get translucent as they become golden in color. Now you can see that these onions are golden brown. They're a little bit translucent as well. So I'm now going to add about a tablespoon of butter, and it's just unsalted butter. And I'm going to add another little splash of olive oil, and then let that melt. And then I'm going to sprinkle this with about 1 tablespoon of flour. Now, if you're gluten-free, you can use gluten-free flour. It's a 1-to-1 ratio for most of them. And I'm just going to saute that for about a minute to get the sort of floury taste off of the flour. Helps the flour actually sort of pops and acts as a thickener without being flour tasting. So you saute that for about a minute. And you don't want anything to burn. If your mixture sort of ends up any more than the color of peanut butter, you've got to turn your temperature down. All right, and so to that, I'm going to add about a half teaspoon of Dijon mustard. And then another tablespoon of tomato paste. Now, you can get tomato paste in a jar. I just like it in the tube. I use it fairly frequently. Actually, I'm going to add a little more tomato paste. I don't think that's quite a tablespoon. All right, and then we're going to toss that all around together and let that cook for about 30 seconds. You don't want it to burn, but it's okay if the tomato bits sort of get brown. That'll just develop the flavor a little bit more nicely. All right, and at this point, I'm going to add about a half a cup to a cup of unsalted vegetable stock, or if you like beef or chicken stock, that's fine. And we're just going to cook that for a minute. And then I'm going to add my 1 cup of lentils, which you can see turned into about 3 cups of lentils once it got cooked. And these are still warm. And I'm just gonna get them all together. And I'm gonna turn the heat down way low, just to a simmer. So all of these can just kind of incorporate the flavor into each other. And then once I get this all incorporated, I'm gonna let it cook for just a minute or two, and then I'm gonna add the mushrooms and what's left of the wine back to my sauce. And then I'm gonna let it all cook together just to kind of heat through for another 1 to 2 minutes. You don't want the mushrooms to get soggy. You just kind of want everything to incorporate the flavors. So I'm just gonna put a lid on that and let it simmer and sort of get the flavors to come together. All right, so I've let this simmer for, I don't know, 2 minutes maybe, just enough to get everything sort of the same temperature. And then I'm gonna add about 1/3 to a 1/2 cup of sour cream. I usually put about 1/3 of a cup, but if you like it a little more sour creamy, you can do that. I don't like how heavy it is, so I usually add about 1/3 of a cup. And then just stir it all together, and it is ready to serve. So usually, traditionally, this is served with noodles. So you can certainly do a whole grain noodle with this. You can do a whole grain brown rice, quinoa, bulgur, whatever sort of whole grain you like. You could do it over zoodles, which is zucchini noodles that have been blanched or quick sauteed. I really like rice cauliflower, which I usually just get at the store, either frozen or fresh. If I don't, and I have a head of cauliflower, you can just take it over your cheese grater and grate it down, including the stem. And then you just steam it in a pot, and it honestly takes 2 to 3 minutes, depending on how crunchy or soft you like it. I like it sort of al dente, so I cook it for about 2 to 3 minutes, and then it's ready to go. So I just put a little bit of the cauliflower rice down and the stroganoff right on top of it. Also, traditionally, it's served with a mixed green salad, but usually, just for sake of ease, and my kids, I usually just do a bag of either frozen green beans or frozen peas, just to give it some greens and sort of a plain flavor, because this is a lot of flavor and a very deep sort of comfort food flavor. So it's nice to just have a simple green vegetable with it. I hope that you enjoy the lentil stroganoff, and I hope you explore a little bit with lentils in your own cooking.